G'day everyone and welcome to the Trademate Sports Betting Podcast. Today I'm joined by Ed Hawkins, who is the three-time Sports Journalists Association's Sports Betting Writer of the Year. He is Betfair's cricket betting correspondent, and he has also written two books on gambling, specifically Bookie Gambler Fixer Spy and Sporting Chancer. Welcome to the podcast, Ed.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure having you on, mate. Maybe just give everyone a bit of a background on yourself to start off with, and maybe explain why you've chosen cricket, as your choice of sport to bet.
Yeah, I suppose it's one of those stories which starts with I kind of fell into it really. Initially, I wanted to be a football reporter, and I ended up on a newspaper, and there was no one around to write cricket, and cricket always been a passion anyway. As a kid growing up, I wanted to be a cricketer. Realised I was nowhere near good enough, so I thought I might like to write about sport instead. So started writing about cricket. Then an opportunity came up to go and work at the Racing Post, which is kind of the betting Bible over here in the UK. And I started writing about cricket for them, and that was about 20 years ago. So I've been tipping on cricket for about 20 years.
Yeah, wow, okay. And are you normally focusing on in-play or pre-match betting?
Bit of both. I'm more pre-match than in-play because I enjoy that unknown side of things before a game starts. But I think it's almost impossible now not to be heavily involved in the in-play, and increasingly it's an area which you've got to go to because the vast majority of money is there for the in-play now, and there are lots of ways to find value on in-play because obviously people are making split-second emotional decisions. So the ability to spot risks is greater. So in-play is fantastic. But I enjoy the pre-match stuff more than the in-play, I think.
Yeah, so I guess when you're looking at a pre-match selection, I'm sorry, I'm still here. My camera just likes to turn off every now and then. When you're going to spot a pre-match bet, can you kind of explain your process? Like, are you more like stats based, or are you looking at the prices? And I mean, are you kind of just doing like paper prices kind of thing, writing down what you think your prices are?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, my strategy has changed. I mean, obviously, I've been doing it 20 years, so it was always going to change. But I used to be what I'd call sort of an eye punter. So I'd be betting on players from what I'd seen on the TV. Because I always felt I could spot a decent player, a batsman who had that extra split second of time facing a quick bowler, or a fast bowler had a particularly nice action and stuff like that. So when I started, I was sort of checking the 11s of each team and then working out which I felt man for man was the best team, and I'd be betting that way. And that would be the same as things like top run scorer or top bowler. I'd be thinking like, this guy, using my eye, this guy is a good player. And the further I got into it, I realized that statistics were far more important. And I think with the advent of social media, however long ago that was, I can't even remember. I don't really want to remember either. That it's almost impossible now to hold an opinion about anything without somebody telling you that you're an idiot and you're wrong, and then producing some incredible statistic to actually prove that. So I realized that there's no point saying, for example, Glenn Maxwell is a value bet to top score for Australia in a T20 because I think he's a good player. Someone might be able to produce a statistic which says that Finch is the man to follow because he wins X amount times out of X, and the price is wrong. So you've got to be able to show now statistically that a price is wrong. And the last few years, I've really been doing that, talking about paper prices, as you say, working out what the odds should be. How often do these guys win? How often do these teams win? And trying to factor in things like conditions and matchups as well. I'm conscious there is a lot to get through there. So yeah. It's incredibly involved these days, the way you have to do it to try and find those edges.
And I mean, if you ask someone in football betting, it's pretty hard to find a sustainable long-term edge from just looking at stats nowadays, because that's kind of
Sure.
factored into the bookies' prices. Would you say it's a completely different ball game for cricket? Are I guess the compilers and maybe betters themselves aren't too, yeah,
Yeah,
looking
look,
too much at the stats?
yeah, I think there is that. I think there's also about a question about resources for bookmakers, particularly on the high street. You know, they don't have the resources to put into markets which, you know, basically just don't turn over as much. So it's not as important as them for them to get it as right as football, which is obviously their biggest business. So they have to be absolutely, you know, to the decimal point on a price
Yeah.
with football, and you don't get that in cricket because there just isn't the time or resources available for the bookies to do that. So that's absolutely terrific for us if you're a cricket punter and if you know your stuff and you know that. Talking about Glenn Maxwell, the example I gave earlier, I mean, he's a guy in T20 cricket for Australia. He was likely to go off about 7-2, 4-1, and at that 7-2 price, we know we're getting about 4% implied probability in our favour because that's how the stats throw up an edge. So bookmakers aren't really pricing up markets on how often guys or teams are actually winning at the moment, and that could well change. But at the moment, there's significant edges there.
And how much does your approach change from format to format? So, is it the same kind of approach T20 one day as Test matches?
It's not the same approach in Test matches. I think conditions are absolutely king, absolutely everything, and I would be nervous about betting in a Test match if I didn't have a really great idea of what the pitch was going to do. I don't like to be betting in a Test match unless I can say I know that the pitch is likely to behave like this. Well, that's not so important in ODI and T20, and also in Test matches. The toss is incredibly important, and there's been a recent trend, probably since the advent of T20 and the real sort of popularism of white ball cricket has taken hold, where players can see that's where the money is, so they've prioritised white ball cricket, and that's fine. Don't want to start having a conversation about traditionalism versus the modern trends, but the toss is really important in Test match cricket because of white ball cricket has eroded techniques, and I can prove that, by the way, with stats. If you go and look at Cricket Only Better, the Betfair betting podcast, long time ago, we did prove that white ball cricket has eroded technique. So it's not a lazy opinion before people start tweeting me. The toss is so important, and because pitches tend to wear, techniques on a fourth and fifth day wearing pitch are really exposed. So it's quite tricky for a team who is batting last to win a Test match, and that throws up plenty of value, I think, on your match outright. So I'm really keen to be betting if I know the pitch and who's batting first or second.
Yeah, you talked about pitch conditions. Is that like something that you could find out? Like, how early can you find out about pitch conditions, or is it more so just watching the broadcast half an hour before the match starts?
I don't do that because I don't tend not to trust the people who are sticking their keys into the pitch and what have you. You know, the infamous pitch report. I don't spend any time with that at all. I will be purely looking at statistics and looking what the first innings averages are on that particular venue. Looking at toss bias, which is really important in Test matches. And ODI and T20, because there are some venues which favour the chaser. And we're talking about Pakistan Super League at the moment, and they were going to be playing it in Karachi, but they've switched it to the UAE now. And a little bit disappointed they're not playing it in Karachi because there's a huge toss bias there for the chaser. Absolutely incredible. I think it's like 17 out of the last 19, I think. won by the chaser. So there's a fantastic edge there for punters, and the markets can be slow to pick up on that, or they can be slow to recall that. So doing your research on a ground is really, really important. You've got to have an idea of what the pitch is going to do before having any kind of bet, I think. But as I said, I wouldn't be worried about what the broadcasters are saying. I'll be on Cricinfo, first innings average, who does well there, who doesn't do well there, what type of bowlers do well there, is it a spinning wicket, and all that kind of thing, and really, really going into it in as much depth as you possibly can.
Can you pay much attention to the weather, especially in a test match, or is that kind of no edge there? The bookmakers have already seen that there's possibility of rain on day 3 or 4 or whatever day it could be.
Yeah, I mean the thing with the weather is in test matches, I suppose people talk about there being an edge. If there's a poor weather forecast, there's going to be rain, they're going to start backing the draw. One of my golden rules of betting on test matches, if there is weather around, I'm not backing the draw, because time can be made up, and often is. The drainage systems around the world are so good now. It's really, really rare to lose a whole chunk of overs in a test match, which means there's a more likely chance for a draw. It just doesn't happen. I think I can probably tell you I've tipped the draw maybe once or twice in the last 10 years in a test match, and that was probably because of a really bad weather forecast, and I didn't win. It was wrong. So I don't get involved with that at all. I know there are people who have got their weather radars on their laptops or what have you, and they're watching when the rain is about to turn up, and there's an edge there on an exchange because you can see the weather radar, and then you can lay the draw, and then it starts to rain on the broadcast. That's how people make their money, taking that difference in price when it rains and the price collapses.
Yeah, wow. And the coin toss, mate, is that do you place bets ever before the coin toss, or are you always waiting till after the coin toss? And I guess how much does the coin toss play on the volatility in the betting market?
Yeah, I mean it's obviously venue dependent. It's hugely venue dependent. I mentioned Karachi earlier, so there's a big favour for the chaser there. So you can go one of two ways. So you've got in the Pakistan Super League, you've got 1.7 chance against 2.3 chance in Karachi. Now you can automatically argue that 1.7 chance is a terrible wager, because of that huge toss bias. So you can lay them because there's no guarantee that obviously the toss is going to go their way. So that's value. Clearly, it's value because they're 1.7, and the toss bias is such it's basically a 50-50 game on a coin toss. So you can go that way, or you can actually wait until that 1.7 chance that has actually got the toss bias in its favour, and it's not going to. The price isn't going to collapse as big as perhaps you might think. Certainly in the PSL, before postponement, the market on the exchange Betfair was quite slow to pick up on the toss bias. So the market can be a little bit inefficient with regard to toss biases and the way pitches change now over the course of the tournament because of COVID. We've got so many games being played on just like 2 or 3 services. But generally, when you've got a toss bias, if you don't want to be particularly value anal about it, wait till after the toss and get with your team, which has the toss bias in favour. And also, particularly with T20, let's say with ODI cricket, there are bias related to individual teams. Some teams are good at chasing, teams are good at defending. The Sixers, for example, in the Bash, apart from last season, I think historically a terrible record defending a score. So you wouldn't want to be on the Sixers defending a score at a venue which had a bias for the chaser, for example, or Sunrisers Hyderabad surprisingly have a very poor record defending a score as well over the last 2 or 3 years. So again, if you can marry up venue toss bias with team bias, and then wait till after the toss, then you're going to be okay in the long run.
Yeah. So how efficient would you say the market is in general? I mean, I would assume the betting market isn't efficient before the toss, but if we're talking seconds before the game kicks off, how
Yeah,
efficient is the market? And if it is, or however efficient it is there a bookmaker or maybe one of the exchanges that you think is the most fair reflection of the true odds?
yeah. I mean, I think Betfair is a fair reflection of the true odds post toss. I think, as I mentioned earlier about the PSL, it can be quite sort of slow to pick up on toss bias, and it also can be quite slow to pick up on pitch characteristics, or and this is a bit more involved, run scoring trends. I think we're seeing run scoring trends in T20 going up. In the IPL recently, there was certainly a lot of edges for 160 or 170 or more. When T20 started, those kind of scores were not so common, but now they're round about par. 160, mid 160s around about par, because we're seeing runs going up. The market can be a little bit inefficient in terms of historic trends catching up with that. And in tournaments, it can be slow to catch up pre-toss with a toss bias or pitch characteristics, certainly. And that goes for Betfair as well.
Yeah, so you wouldn't, like a bookmaker like Pinnacle, you'd say Betfair is probably more efficient than Pinnacle?
Yeah, I think Betfair's a very efficient market because there's a lot of Indian money in the Betfair market, and your Indian syndicates are extremely switched on to what is happening. So Betfair is probably the most efficient market, I'd say.
Yeah, okay, very interesting. We mentioned this a little bit before about how thorough the compiling would be on the bookmaker's side. I heard you on a previous podcast say something along the lines of, yeah, if you do your research into a batsman's ground form, their win rate and their record against the bowlers, I think it was in 2020 you were mentioning it,
Yeah.
you'll be a winner in the long term in the run scorer market. So can you kind of explain that? Because I mean, it's probably, it's a thorough process, I assume, going through all those statistics, but I mean, a lot of people could probably learn the ability to do that over time.
Yeah, no, anyone can do that. It's just a question of having the time to do the research. If you've got the time to do it, then you'll be fine, and you'll make money on the long run. You'll make money on the long run if you're betting wrong prices, and a wrong price on a top run scorer market for me is if I can prove that we have an edge on implied probability. Now, somebody like KL Rahul, I can look at his last 2-year record in IPL, last 3-year record in IPL, and I can tell you he's going to be winning that top run scorer market about 40% of the time. And often you're able to get 9-4, you're able to get 5-2 sometimes on KL Rahul, so you immediately got an edge there. I mentioned Maxwell earlier, getting about 4 points on implied probability if he's going off at about 7-2, because how often he wins. Tell me how often a batsman wins. Tell me how often a bowler wins over the last 2 and 3 years. I don't want to look at his entire career. I think that's really important. I don't think it's recency bias to be talking about last 2 or 3 years, because you've got a big weight of games to go through, and you need to be narrowing it down to the last 2 or 3 years, because you've got new players coming through, you've got lineups changing all the time. You don't want to be looking at a guy's long career to work out how often he wins. Just keep it to last 2-3 years, and you'll be fine if you're taking wrong prices on that win rate. To give you extra comfort, Rugs, you can look at the guy's record on a particular ground, and if he's got a solid record there, that's another tick in his favour. and also now, and this is something which is really going to be coming to the fore in the next few years, I think. You go to a website like Crickmetric, where you can go and check on a guy's individual record against individual bowlers. So you're able to look at his strike rate against that bowler, how many times he's been dismissed against that bowler, and you can really basically build a picture from numbers 1 to 7 about where the value is. So if you can get all those planets in line, win rate, ground form against bowlers, you're going to be fine. You're going to make money.
Yeah. Oh, I mean,
and you can flip that round as well. You can do it with bowlers. The top bowler market is incredibly profitable, and mistakes are made there with bookmakers all the time, because that is a market which they're really pricing up on reputation rather than record. An example might be Kagiso Rabada versus Lungi Ngidi for the top bowler. Now, Rabada's going to be your 9-4 favourite, and you might get 100 to 30 about Ngidi. Now, on win rate, it should be the other way around. Ngidi is a better strike bowler than Rabada. Now, Ngidi may go for 10 and over, but he takes his strike record is vastly superior to Rabada, and his win rate is vastly superior. So you're getting a massive edge on a guy like Ngidi, and there are edges all over the place on your top bowler markets like that. I mean, there's a really profitable market top bowler, because realistically, you're only really, you don't have much to beat. You've got like 2 or 3 guys that are only really in it, and particularly in T20, there's a huge advantage to be bowling up front and at the death in those power plays, because batsmen are taking more risks. So bowlers take more wickets. So top bowler is probably my favourite market, I'd say.
Yeah, I assume you've kind of got it down to a fine art, like pre-match now. Like you probably, you know all the websites you want to go to, you know all the stats you want to look at. So you've probably got it down to however long time period has probably, gotten quicker over time. How long do you think, like on average, how long does it take you to do your research on one particular game? Maybe it's longer for a test match or a certain type of cricket match.
Yeah, it's got longer, but it takes about a couple of hours now. Because I've got my own database now where I can look at the win rates for these guys. I've got somebody who does that for me, so that's easy for me. But it's relatively easy to start building your own database. You can go onto Cricinfo and you can find out your win rates on your top bats and top bowlers in international cricket. It's harder to do it with franchise cricket. It's more laborious. There's no actual sort of manual method to do it. You can try and find a computer boffin who can go and grab that data for you and put it into an Excel and then update it yourself, and you'll be fine again. But it takes time, but it is rewarding.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if you're a cricket lover, and even if you just want to have a bit of fun on the side, like you're not going to be too phased about doing a little bit of research before a game. You mentioned looking at batsmen's like last 2 or 3 years data and not so much past that. How much do you factor in form? Because from I watch cricket every summer in Australia. I don't follow it that closely. And from like I guess maybe you want to call it like a punter's outside kind of eyes looking in, it seems like, form weighs pretty heavily on how a batsman especially might perform in a game.
Yeah, and there are some players who hit a rich vein of form and then don't kind of stop. Dhawan, for example, in T20 cricket, once he gets a score, he's a guy who's capable of putting scores back to back and just to keep going. He just hits a purple patch and keeps going. Whereas the majority of players have a score and then it's 2 or 3 games where they don't in T20 cricket. So form by and large is tempering. You've got to try and make sure you're on the right side of that, and that is not easy. Timing is absolutely everything when it comes to any form of betting, as you know. So there are going to be times where you're hitting those win rates, and you're taking those wrong prices, but your guy's just not in form. Rishabh Pant, perhaps last season in the IPL, not this one which has just been postponed. He was an example of that. He cost a lot of money. And Virat Kohli has been in a terrible sequence of form for a couple of years now. And a lot of people have lost a lot of units backing Kohli on win rates over the last 2 years across all formats because of what he'd done previously. And he's just the guy's just in a rut. So there are times where things like that just aren't really predictable. There could be things we just don't know about which are going on. Off the field, he's got some stress issues that he's dealing with, things which he's not particularly happy about. In the team environment, at the end of the day, it is still a gamble. So we can't predict everything, and form is just one of those things that we can't predict. We can see it once the tournament is underway. You can see it when a guy is striking a ball well, for example. But also, you can't. I don't think you can see it with a bowler if a bowler is in form. People might disagree. Maybe that's just my eye, or it's just not my specialism with spotting when a bowler is in form or out of form. So it's tricky. It's ephemeral. It's the thing which probably makes it most exciting. I think still you can go into the matrix and reckon you're predicting it to the last decimal point, but actually the guy's just not seeing it that well.
Yeah. So how does that affect the way you price a match then? Like if, for example, you wanted to bet Kohli because every stat lined up in your direction and you could spot some value, but I mean, he hasn't scored for about 5-6 games or something like that.
Yeah.
How does that play into your pricing?
That's hard because this is when you have to start trying to block out emotion, I think. And you've just got to try to show faith in the numbers. And Kohli's a great example of that. I think he top scored once in the IPL. And I think he top scored with about 33 or 34. So he was never actually in form. And I was on him up until 2 games before he top scored. I just basically ran out of patience with Kohli. Whereas, of course, by the letter of the law, what I should have been doing is up until that point where I did top score, I should really have been hammering his prices harder, because the data was saying, he's overdue and he's got to win at some point. But I think also if you're gonna do that, if you're gonna allow emotion to come in, and that's almost impossible to do unless you're a robot, and some people are brilliant at it. But I'd never claim to be someone who can completely block out emotion. If you can't block it out, just let it in and just accept that's the kind of punter you are, that you just don't want to be kept being made a mug by one particular guy. And if he top scores when you're not on him, fine, just put it down to experience and just put it down to the fact that is gambling, and that's why we enjoy doing it.
Yeah, and so overall, mate, would you say the best value opportunities in cricket come in those top run scorer, top bowler markets, or are there, I guess, I'm not sure what you call it in cricket, maybe match betting or 1x2, I guess you can call it in soccer, but like what would you, I guess what markets do you think create the most value often?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting a lot of value on those top bat and top bowler markets, in play markets with innings runs, particularly in T20. There's a huge amount of value to be had betting on the extremes. There's a huge lot of value to be had betting in play on test matches with on the exchanges, people overreacting to the new ball, for example. It still surprises me when we see clatter of early wickets in a test match, and there are punters out there who think the ball's going to keep swinging for 80 overs when it's not. Runs are going to be scored. So I just think cricket is is the perfect sport to bet on because there are edges written into the rules, if you like, which provide that value. As I mentioned there with the new ball in test matches, we know when wickets are more likely to happen. We know when it's more likely to get easier for batsmen to score runs. The toss bias, the pitch conditions are so important. There's value all over the place. T20 cricket, going extremes in the death overs, I think is a really big one on innings runs, for example, in IPL. On the runs line, saying you want 40 or 50 more in the last 3 overs of a T20, and you'll get massive prices on that. Just mind-boggling prices that you can pick up, and you can be hitting those in every single game, but you only need a handful to come off, and you're in profit. So, and it does happen. It happens every franchise tournament.
So what you're saying is there's value everywhere, man. I think you mentioned every market then.
There is. There's value everywhere, but that goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think perhaps about resources and time that bookmakers can have to put into this. So cricket is just a wash with value, and in relation to a sport like football, where the algorithms and the resources are so intuitive, complex, and vast, respectively, cricket is still providing that edge because it's just not comparable.
Yeah, and I believe you once mentioned, that that even if a batsman or a bowler has an amazing innings, picks up lots of wickets, it invariably goes to the man of the match award, goes to the batsman. Can you?
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of put you on the spot here, but are there any like hard form statistics about this and whether like that's actually an explorable betting avenue?
Yeah, and it's something I've only actually started to look into this year. I mean, I think there's a real deep data dive to be done on it, but maybe I'll throw the question back at you. We talk about man of the match awards in franchise T20 cricket of the front 22. How many of them do you think are specialist bowlers? That's most man of the match awards throughout careers. There's the top 22. How many do you think are specialist bowlers?
Maybe 5.
No, there's only one, so it's Rashid Khan, and he's at number 22. So there is a huge bias because it's learned behaviour about the game of cricket. Batsmen, for some reason, they are pedestaled. That may well go back to the game's tradition and very early days where cricket was batting was considered an art form and bowling was to be done by the farm labourers, and it was the gentry who would bat. It probably goes back to that, but there is a huge bias for man of the match awards to go to batsmen because it is a batsman's game. Particularly in T20, there is a huge correlation between your top match run scorer and your man of the match award, and it's something to look into if you're betting a guy for even top individual innings run scorer, someone like KL Rahul at 9-4. You've got a massive edge there, but you can be backing him for man of the match at 7-8-1. You're getting a massive edge there because if he top scores and he's doing it 40% of the time, because of the relationship between your dominant batsman and the man of the match, you're getting another edge. So, you put that one in your notebook.
Yeah, I like that, mate. That's a good one. We've talked a lot of pre-match. I've got one question here about in-play betting, and it was from one of your co-hosts on the Betfair podcast. I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name, but his last name's it's Paul Krishnamurti, something like that.
Yeah, you've got Krishnamurti. Yeah,
Namurti. There you go. I thought he said something really interesting. He said, "Be a contrarian once the game starts, and don't be a favourite backer." And in play, and he says you'll be in a good place because things can change really quickly in a game of cricket. I mean, especially test matches. So, Yeah, I mean, have you had much experience with that yourself, and is that something you try to explore in the in-play markets?
I think that's kind of innate. I think that's built in as a gambler or a punter or someone who's interested in betting. And I think that goes for any sport and any punter really. I think we are programmed to be wanting to be taking on the favourites and be contrarian. And the phrase I always think about is only dead fish go with the tide. So definitely, I'm always trying to find ways I can go against the market, I suppose. I will try to find statistics which back that opinion up. I just won't be lazy and be an awkward contrarian, if that makes sense. I'll want some sort of data to help back that up. But it kind of goes back to that point I was saying about in test matches, the new ball, you'll get a couple of wickets early with it, but it's quite easy to be the contrarian then, because really you should, if you're steeped in the game and you're steeped in betting, then it should be child's play really to recognise that the status quo in that game isn't going to remain. Status quo is another good phrase really. You can always challenge the status quo, I think, with cricket, particularly test matches, because as Paul mentioned in that podcast, it's 5 days, and your favourite on day one isn't necessarily going to be the same favourite on day 3, because the conditions change, because of what the new ball will or won't do, and that's brilliant for in-play betting test matches. I think it's harder to be a contrarian in ODI cricket. I've always had a feeling ODI cricket, your upset or things turning around are slimmer than in T20 or test matches. And that's not my favourite in-play format. I much prefer the other two. White ball cricket and teams and players are far more consistent, I found.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly before. You said that you think there's value in the kind of, betting if there's a wicket when the new ball comes on.
Yeah, so I just think the market's going to overreact to that new ball in test matches. There'll be punters who are expecting that ball to swing for 80 overs, and it's going to lose its shine. Its batting is always going to get easier. And particularly if you're doing your research on the pitch as well, you'll find instances where that view is backed up. South Africa being an example, I think that was also mentioned on the podcast on show 80. Because the Kookaburra ball loses its luster quite quickly, but it'll do quite a bit early on in South Africa. So those positions at numbers 4, 5, and 6, that's where the bulk of runs are scored in South Africa. So that you do your research on that, and you adapt that to particular venues, and you'll find an edge that way across all the markets. We're talking in play, we're talking trading the match odds. If there have been early wickets, well, you're going to go against the tide there, but you can also apply it to your top run scorer markets as well, and your innings runs lines, of course, as well. That's another one which can overreact to those early wickets with a new ball in test matches, I think.
Yeah, I mean, being a contrarian in the new ball market, do you think that also? I mean, do you think the odds are probably a little bit bigger too? I think this happens in all kinds of sports because of maybe the commentators. Maybe, there's been 90. I think is it 80 overs every new ball or something like that?
Yeah.
Like, do you think that maybe there's been a long partnership for a while, and the commentators are trying to find something new and exciting to talk about? The new ball's coming, and it kind of gets overhyped, and that reflects in the odds too.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true with the second new ball. It can be a little bit overhyped because if you've got two set batsmen and the new ball comes in, then you can have a situation where new balls coming onto the bat much quicker, and it makes it easier to score runs. So that is certainly tricky, but I think it's more a case of, you know, early on in the innings of a test match that there can be an overreaction. People can get emotional, and you've also got to remember on the exchanges, people are, you know, they're trying to manage their position. We've got a test match coming up next week, England versus New Zealand, and say New Zealand are batting first and they're 20 for 2. And people have been on New Zealand because, let's face it, they're absolutely outstanding value at the moment, around about 7 to 2, I think. People are going to panic and they're going to want to try and manage their positions, or want to try and, you know, get out of the bet that they've had. So there's always that opportunity to be the cool as a cucumber and go the other way.
Yeah, no, really interesting stuff, mate. I've really enjoyed kind of getting in the ins and outs of cricket betting. As I mentioned at the start, we haven't really had anyone on before that's we haven't really talked a cent of cricket, to be honest. So this is a this is you know, very handy for our regular listeners and people who might be interested to getting into cricket, mate. So thank you very much for coming on. Can you maybe just mention where people can find you, your write-ups you do for Betfair, the podcast, and maybe mention some of your books too? I think you have one coming out very soon.
Yeah, so you can find me at betting.betfair on the web. That's where we're doing our previews, preview all the big games there. And there's lots of stats pieces and strategy pieces on there which can help you out with your betting and help you make decent decisions. That's kind of what we're all about. The podcast is out every Tuesday. It's Cricket Only Better. You can find that on wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find me at Cricket Betting on Twitter. Yeah, and as you mentioned, I've got a book coming out next month, June. So I'm, you know, also Michael Holding ghostwriter. So Mikey's written a book on racism, not just in sport but in life, and we've spoken with Thierry Henry, Naomi Osaka, Adam Goods, Kyron Tini, about basically the dehumanization of black people throughout the centuries, and it's basically all come from Mikey's chat on Sky Sports around about this time last year, where he made an impassioned speech about racism and how it affected his life and why it existed, and that's the book that has come out of those moments that went viral on Sky Sports ahead of that West Indies test at Southampton, I think it was, this time last year.
Yeah, sensational, mate. I'm sure that will be a very good read for everyone. But yeah, and I was going to say your handle too on Twitter. You must be happy you snapped that one up nice and early.
Yeah, I'm waiting for someone to offer me loads of money for it, but it hasn't happened.
Oh, really? Jeez, I thought you would have had a few offers. Awesome, mate. Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for listening. Please make sure you subscribe and share the podcast around. Always helps. And do a quick rate and review if you've got a spare minute. That would be sensational. And if you're looking to implement some of the strategies we talked about today, maybe not the cricket ones, but the value betting ones, start a free week trial of Trademate Sports. Thank you, Ed, once again. And
thanks for having me.
See you, mate.
See ya.